is absent, is conspicuously unapparent in all of this issue. Now that would be the central figure that you would want to interview or would want to solicit her opinion. April Glass, what does she do? Where is she? Why did she leave Baghdad only a day or two before the invasion? And then why is not she approachable by Dan Rather and Ted Koppel and the rest of these image makers? I think she's the pivotal person in all of this. John Kelly, in front of the Senate, when asked, what if Iraq occupies Kuwait? Would we come to its defense? He says, no, we have no bilateral agreements, defense agreements with these states. Inferring that, well, so what? Let it take over Kuwait. This matter should not unease us in any sense. So there was some sort of agreement that if the Iraqis were to move into Kuwait, the United States would not engage Iraq in a military confrontation. In the first days when the troops were dispatched to the Arabian Peninsula, the United States official position was, we are there for the protection of Saudi Arabia. Well, what happened to Kuwait? If this creature called Kuwait, which was formulated out of the post-war years and protected by United States and European diplomacy, is sacrificed in such a fashion, why do you come to its rescue? What happened? Is there a new world order that means we will have some of these states disappear? Not that it bothers us in the least. People who live there would like these governments and nation states to disappear because they were never representative of their own people. An element that goes vastly unnoticed by the people in the West is that there's no electoral process in that part of the world. The Emir of Kuwait was never elected. As a matter of fact, he was given unproportionate powers in 1961. The power to absolve and dissolve and undo parliament at a strike of his hand, which he did a couple of times. There was no redress. There's no way to redress such a dictator. Last Christmas, during the Christmas vacation, there was a peaceful demonstration by people who are Kuwaitis inside of Kuwait, asking for a democratic and electoral process. They were confronted by police force. They sent police dogs against these demonstrators because the only thing they were asking for is a democratic and electoral process. Now the United States is in that area defending these types of feudalists. American boys stationed in the Arabian Peninsula to defend dictators and tin pot rulers such as the ones in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates. What's the deal? Is it worth it? I don't know if you have any relative or anyone you know who's stationed over there, but what is he doing? Why don't you call your congressman, ask him, what is my relative, what is my friend doing in that part of the world? What is my son, my brother or daughter, what are they doing in Saudi Arabia? Is it our interest to defend monarchs and kings? What happened to the role of the United States? It may not be obvious in this part of the world, but anyone who's living on the other side of the world understands what the role of the United States is, and it's not a good one. It's definitely not a good road. For the first time since the Vietnam War, the reservists have been activated. They've been sent over there. There's more than 200,000 American troops in the area. There's about 35 pieces of the Navy, aircraft carriers, frigates, destroyers, and the rest, swarming around the Arabian Sea and in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. For what? If you ever stop to think for a moment, what are we doing there? What purpose does a war serve in that area when you meaning the American government, is supporting such oligarchies as Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Iraq? I mean, this thing may change in a few years. The United States was supporting Iraq throughout these past 80 years. Now it's opposed to it. Who knows what will happen next year or 4 years down the road or 8 years down the road? It may change. The winds may change once again. Then the United States is supporting Iraq. The main flaw and fallacy in the United States foreign policy is that it has solidly positioned itself with governments that are non-representative against peoples who are working for their self-determination. The self-determination of the peoples of that area. Let us face it, they're not going to tell it to you in the media, but let me tell it to you tonight. Self-determination of the peoples in that area is they want their Islamic identity. Leave them alone. Let them have their Islamic identity. They're not coming here and placing troops in Texas or in Maine or California. They're doing it in their own lands and in their own homes. For God's sake, give them the right to do that. Don't go in there interfering on one side and coming out the loser in 10 years of time. Because United States troops can't stay there forever. They may manage to declare war against 1 billion Muslims in this world. Placing your troops in the vicinity of Mecca and Medina and being involved on the side of the Israelis in the issue of Jerusalem, that's a very successful way of declaring war against 1 billion Muslims. Are you going to stay there for 10 years? For 20 years? What's going to happen after that? Aren't the people in that area going to have their self-determination? Think it out in your heart of hearts. What's going to happen after all of this? That's if we say a military strike may be successful. And we do have statements coming out of administration personalities saying that we may have to stay there for an extended time period. I don't know what the exact quote is, but something to that effect. Waging war against 1 billion people in this world for what? For the cause of a few kingdoms and monarchies in the area and non-representative republics. Those republics that exist don't represent their people. Don't think that I'm one-sided or biased in this issue. They're all the same, monarchies and republics in the Middle East. Very brutal, very nasty, no democratic or electoral process. The United States doesn't care about this. There were students who were, we are told, agitating for democracy in Peking, Beijing, in China. Then all of a sudden you had the newspapers and the media coming out, students for democracy. You can't forget the camera as it focuses in on that student standing in front of a tank that's rolling towards him. But now, throughout the Middle East, there are tens of thousands of students and intellectuals who are literally rotting in jails and prisons and detention centers. They go unnoticed. No one knows about them. A Jew gets scratched in the Soviet Union, the whole world knows about it. Tens of thousands of Muslims lingering in jail in their prime, tortured with all sorts of diabolic and evil means. They go unnoticed. The United States ignores them. Not that the United States doesn't know. I'm sure the informants, the agents, the operatives of the CIA and other intelligence agencies know full well what is happening over there. And after knowing all of that, they take the deliberate decision of siding with the culprits, with the criminals in the area. And then we return to this whole scenario. The Iraqis charging the air with beating the drums of war. The Israelis didn't build an advanced military, probably the 5th best military machine in the world, to have rulers in the area come and say to them, we want to solve our issues around a round table. No, that's not the purpose. The Israelis built that sophisticated military machine so that it may go into action. So they need someone to verbally assault them. And they had that someone in Baghdad. The words coming out of Baghdad assaulting or attacking the Israelis is music to Shamir and Sharon and Aarons and the rest of these in Israel. And that once again, where's the United States policy standing in all of this? Telling the Israelis, keep your cool. Don't get involved in this, because if you do, the issue is going to grow into uncontrollable proportions. And then the Israelis take advantage of all of this without even verbally participating in this affair. Remember in other Middle East crises, you always saw some Israeli official on television, one of these major news-making programs, Meet the Press, Face the Nation, whatever. There always used to be some Israeli that came on and sort of was the authority on the whole subject. But why are they absent now? Has anyone seen any of them around recently? I haven't. Not in any significant sense, like they were before. Why? And then they're getting paid for all of this. The Americans can go over there, place their forces. Israelis have to be quiet, even though this whole affair works to their advantage. And then they come to the United States, they say they want the patriotic defense system, missiles that they have been coveting for some time. They want those. They want F-16s, they want F-15s, they want monies, they want concessions. They got all of that for keeping silent. We can't forget the strategic relationship between the United States and the Israelis. But conveniently, no one is thinking about it within these times. What happened? Is our public memory short on these issues? If a strategic alliance was struck between the United States and Israel back in 1984, it's only 6 years. We shouldn't have forgotten something like that. It's very important, especially in the area of the Middle East, where there are vital interests of the United States, petroleum and the rest. But, I don't know, we managed to do it. And the Israelis always manage to come on top, reaping all the benefits. And we are only in the beginning now. Some people in the United States have begun to voice their concern against the United States being involved in a shooting war in the area. There is a growing political, at least, something to be proud of it from my perspective, compared with the last 10, 15, 20, 40 years of the United States foreign policy. It was impossible a couple of generations ago to take issue with Israel without being labeled an anti-Semite, even though that still try to stick that label to anyone who takes issue with their policies. But there are those people who are stepping in front and saying, wait a minute, let us look at our own interests. Why should we gain the hostility of a vital region in this world in exchange for the satisfaction of a few people who have been mismanaging affairs in all the area? There's a political opposition to the blind support for Israeli policy in the area coming from the United States, and there's a growing militaristic opposition to the Israelis in the Middle East itself. And don't be surprised if next year or the year after you wake up one morning and find out that there is an Islamic outburst in Egypt or in Turkey or somewhere else in the area. You shouldn't be surprised at that whatsoever, because it is in the making. The bottom line to the issue in what is called the Persian Gulf crisis, the bottom line is peoples in that part of the world have been systematically denied, with the support of the American government, European governments, in the post-World War years. They have been denied self-determination, human rights, and this has been going on for a long time. They can only take it for so long, and eventually they will burst forth. We just hope the United States is not part of the rearrangement through hostilities of the map of that area in the Middle East. There are some other issues that are involved here. There's the military-industrial complex that has its own advantages in a world that has ended the hostilities between a communist and a capitalist bloc. It needs to sell its weapons. This is a convenient way of creating a market for those weapons. There is also the other part of the Pacific Rim, with Japan as its center, the European economic market, with Germany as its center, or the Germanic people, these vying for a competitive edge against the United States in world affairs. So the United States is going to the source of the money. There's also the issue of, just before August 2nd, some of you probably heard of the S&L crisis in the United States. Now there's talk about insurance companies and banks facing solvency. And you look around, you find where the money is there in that part of the world. So why not go and have a share of it to boost your own economic well-being? The Bank of Kuwait has 75 tons of gold locked under it, and they can't get into it. Because if they blow up, first of all, they don't have the combination. The people have the combination ran away. But then if they try to blow open that safe deposit, the whole building will come collapsing in, and it is located at an area in which it is feared that it may sink into the sea. So there you have 75 tons of gold locked up. Money is in the area. Petroleum is in the area. The vital interests of the industrial world are in the area. But at the same time, there are governments that are taking the wrong position, neglecting the self-determination and the will of the peoples of that area. I think this is how we should define the Persian Gulf crisis. We should look more at the representatives of the people, of the peoples throughout the area, and not at the governments or the nation states that have been imposed upon them. With these brief words, I hope I shed some light on some areas concerning this subject. I will open it up now for your questions and your comments, and I thank you very much for coming. Once again, yes, I see a hand up here.
What in your view is a good solution for Kuwait?
If we think that Kuwait may re-exist, there is a slight possibility that there will be a Kuwait once again. If they can learn from this debacle and from previous experience, the best way for them to come into existence once again is by representation. This talk, President Bush said there's 4 objectives for the whole matter to be solved: the unconditional withdrawal of Iraqi troops, the return of the government of Kuwait, and the protection of American lives, and also the security of the oil flow from the area. But the return of a non-representative government to Kuwait is not and will never be a solution to what is called quote-unquote Kuwait, or the overarching of the other issues in the area. The only hope there is if the United States can come down hard on its clients in the area and say, look, we can't support you any longer. You have to change. There has to be a better alternative to all of this. Don't be scared of the results of the elections in Jordan and in Algeria. See, there was like a laboratory experiment with democracy limited as it was in the Middle East. Elections took place in a relative sense that were free in Jordan and also in Algeria. And the Islamic representatives of the people were the ones who won most of the votes. And that seemed like to have scared the governments in the Middle East, the nation-state setups in Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the rest of these. We can't afford this, because if we're going to give freedom of elections to these people, they're going to elect us out of office. Well, you forced them to do that. You have denied them freedom of political expression for so long. It's either they go to the ballots and change the status quo, or if you deny them that, they will find other ways that are a little more violent than going to the ballot to change the status quo. And if the Kuwaitis can recognize their mistake and concede this fact and say that if we do return, we will give the people the choice to elect their representative. They want to elect us, that's fine. They want to elect someone else to take care of the country, that's also fine. But give the people the right to elect their representatives. If that is worked out, there may be some hope. And that may grow out of Kuwait and take hold in other areas. It may offer a solution. But short of that, the only solution may take place in a violent manner, which I think is to no one's benefit, insider or outsider. Okay, I'll take the oral questions first. I have a few written ones here. Yes, please.
Yeah. How well do you think that Saddam Hussein represents the Iraqi people? I mean, you said that lots of government in whose areas doesn't recognize the people, right? In that case, how about the Saddam Hussein? Does he really represent their people or the interest of the Arabic people as a whole?
The question was, I spoke about non-representative governments in the area. How about Saddam Hussein? Does he represent the Iraqi people, or does he represent the Arab people? Well, definitely not. Saddam Hussein came to power through a military coup. He shot his way to the palace. He is no less illegitimate than those who rule in Kuwait and the rest of this area. So whatever Saddam Hussein does, whether he wins or he loses in all of this, whatever he does, it's not something that the Iraqi people themselves have authorized. I was speaking the other day to a person whose mother had arrived from Iraq somewhat recently. And I spoke to another person also whose parents had come from Iraq. And they all agree that Saddam Hussein is probably supported by supported by one-third of the population. And that one-third are those who are intimately involved in the administration of the state apparatus. So he's a problem that has to be solved. We've been saying this for a long time. He was the person who launched an aggressive war and was financed by the same quarters right now that are turning around and giving the financial support for U.S. troops in the area. First it was him who was receiving this, then Bush dispatches a couple of his secretaries around the world, hat in hand, to finance the American presence there in the area. So Saddam Hussein is definitely not a representative of his people. What he does is an act, what he did 10 years ago by launching a war of aggression against a neighboring state is as criminal as him taking over another nation state in the area. Yes.
You mentioned that post the Iran-Iraq war, that was saying that Iraq had a large debt. From what I've read, $35 billion to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Now, isn't that true that he also told them that he wanted that debt abolished? He wanted an additional $35 billion, and Saudi Arabia only gave him $200 million, and Kuwait $40 million. Kuwait stipulating that once Iraq recognized their sovereignty, that they would consider abolishing the debt.
Economics and finance are at the heart of this whole issue. That is what made him move his military into Kuwait. There was an agreement, many of you probably don't know Arabic, but I could have stated the statement that was agreed upon, which Saddam Hussein in one of his speeches repeated. And that is, in the war against Iran, Saddam says, we offered the manpower and you offered the money power. And so why should I, after all of this, come out of this war owing you any money? That shouldn't be the case. He wanted them to write off his debts, and obviously they weren't in a position to write off these debts. They even were arrogant enough as to, as I mentioned, overproduce, thereby bringing down the price of oil to about $14 per barrel. This person depends on oil exports for all of his reconstruction effort after the war. He wanted the price to go up to about $24 a barrel so that he can pay off some of his debts and then look into improving the internal condition of his country. At the meeting that took place in Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince of Kuwait, Saad al-Abdullah, and the Vice President of Iraq, Izzat Ibrahim Duri. In that meeting, the way it broke up was they were discussing the matter of these debts, and the Kuwaiti Crown Prince said to him, gesticulating in a very threatening manner, that the Emir of Kuwait will have Saddam's neck. This is an Arabic expression, roughly translated as will have Saddam's neck under his foot. The person took that as an insult, abruptly ended the meeting, returned immediately to Iraq, and the second day, the Iraqi forces went storming into Kuwait, invaded the country, and the rest is what is known to you. They didn't want to waive any of his debts. The pressure was on him, the heat was on him. Obviously that was the only thing he could do, to go and take over the oil field so he can pay back what was due, and then we have what we have today.
What's your reference for that? Your reference for that?
My reference for what I just said?
Hear about.
Yeah, well, I have a person who was there who related this word via another person who I know. I can't divulge any names. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear. You have to speak up. I hope everyone heard what it seems some people back there didn't hear. Well, I can summarize what I understood. I was trying to listen very closely. He said that my selective beginning with the year 1978 indicates to him that I deliberately chose that as the year that the Islamic Revolution in Iran took place. And then from there on I did a lot of jumping. I spoke about Iraq, I spoke about Israel, I spoke about Kuwait. I jumped around very much, but I didn't jump around concerning Iran. And hence, as an extension to that, he understood that I was inferring that Iran is the ideal way of Islamic self-representation or self-determination. I want to say, I think there's a couple of instruments here that have recorded what I said. I wanted to say that this issue goes back before 1978, but the war that was launched by the central figure in the whole discussion, which is Saddam Hussein, is the person who made the decision to invade Kuwait. There's no way of me trying to jump away from him. I had to jump back to him because his decisions influenced a lot of areas or a lot of nation states in the area. As far as Iran is concerned, I said that Iran, and I hope there's no mis-extrapolation concerning this, Iran is the only part of the Middle East in which people have gained their self-determination. Now, I'm not saying that this is a complete process. I'm not saying it is an ideal process. That was in the ears of the beholder. What I'm trying to say is that the other areas, the other countries, the other nation states in the Middle East do not have self-representation. An attempt at that succeeded in Iran, and because of that success, it incurred the wrath of the rulers in the area, and in the forefront of which was Saddam Hussein, which set into motion the events that we have been witnessing throughout these years of the war that accumulated in the decision of invading Kuwait, which also brought about the reactions and the set of variables that we have almost at our attention day and night now. That's basically what I said. I have a few written questions here. First one says, well, it's in Arabic and I'll translate it. Do you expect a global Islamic revolution to unite the Muslims, and if so, when? Oh, he has it here translated in English. Do you expect an Islamic revolution that will unify the Muslims of the world? If you take a look at the context of the Muslim world in the past 20 years, and then you look at it today, you will have no choice but to be optimistic that there will be that surge of Islamic determination. Maybe you could express it as an Islamic revolution, you could say Islamic renaissance, you could say Islamic reinstatement, whatever the words are. I'm not going to get caught up in words. But that is definitely in the making. The forces that are opposed to it opt to confront it with force. It is left no option but to counter that force with force. You can, once again, you can look at Algeria and Jordan as two samples. There were elections there, and you saw how the Muslims won a good percentage of the parliamentarian or the seats on the regional or governorate levels. That did not go down well with the governments there, And so they turn around and they make some decisions that indicate that there's not going to be any more freedom for elections because they are afraid that Muslims will win the majority of the seats. Another question here says, if the United States had not intervened by sending troops to Saudi Arabia, would Saddam Hussein have invaded Saudi Arabia? I don't think the decision of Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait, in his mind, I don't think that the United States' presence or absence was a deterrent. Now, from Kuwait on to Saudi Arabia, of course, I think the United States' presence there made him reconsider. If you listen closely to what he was saying before the invasion, he was naming in particular the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. He did not use the specific word Saudi Arabia, but there are statements of his that generalized and said the oil producers in the Persian Gulf, which could include Saudi Arabia. So there is reason to believe that within the sights of his armed aggression into Kuwait, he also envisioned moving on to the United Arab Emirates and through the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, where the concentration of oil is. Superimposing the American forces with the rest of the other forces that are actually there only to camouflage the American presence. A contingent of forces from Egypt and a token presence from Morocco and a few other 1,000 soldiers from Pakistan or Syria. All of these are just camouflaging the main military presence there, which is the American presence. And that, of course, made him, convinced him that he could not go any farther. Do you think he would be closer to a solution to the Palestinian question? Do you think we would be closer to a solution to the Palestinian question? The issue of linkage always comes up. Is there a linkage between the Israelis and what they are doing to the Palestinians compared to the Iraqis and what they are doing to the Kuwaitis? There are some similarities and there are some obviously departures in these two issues. Bringing the Palestinian question into focus, I think that those who are itching for a war would like to see the Israelis involved in this Persian Gulf crisis. Because if this can be isolated and the Israelis are not involved, I think it would defeat the purpose for which it was originally launched. And that is to give the legal, the political, the military, and the moral justification for the Israelis to send their war machine into action, thereby occupying new lands in Lebanon and in Syria, the Fertile Crescent, the sources of water. Because, listen, in the future, what is going to count in the area are the sources of water. That is what the whole civilizations throughout history in Mesopotamia, Phoenicia, Assyria, the whole civilizations were constructed around the sources and in proximity to the sources of water. The Israelis are not absent-minded to this fact, and hence they covet those sources of water. Lebanon, which is rich in water, is probably the first area to which the Israeli armies will be moving if there is a linkage between the Israelis and what is called the Persian Gulf crisis. Lebanon has been, in the past years, we're here at a university, we know the university climate. Before 1982 and the Israeli invasion occupation of half of that country by what was called Peace for Galilee by Ariel Sharon, prior to that, Lebanese students who wanted to come to universities such as this it was one of the most impossible tasks to obtain, first of all, admission to a university, and then following that, it was very unlikely for them to obtain the visa to do that. After 1982, one of the most easiest things for a Lebanese student was to get admitted to one of these universities in the West, and then to obtain a visa very conveniently thereafter. The purpose for that was to drain Lebanon from the element of the youth, who were basically the main opposition to the Israeli presence in Lebanon. This draining process has been going on for some time, so that when the time comes, the Israeli forces this time can go into Lebanon, and that stiff resistance will not be present there. So to answer this question in short, are we closer to the solution of the Palestinian problem? I think all the events there that are taking place are bringing us closer to the solution of that problem. This is one of the contributory issues. Another question here says, what is your solution to stop Saddam's army who raped the women of Khurram Shahr in Iran before and are now raping the women of Kuwait? As Muslims, what can we do to stop this and other hostile acts of Saddam and his allies? I guess this is addressed to what Muslims can do in this regard, and I think what Muslims can do is to continue on their plans of having representation for the people in that area. This is a struggle that is going on. Muslims are more aware of this than non-Muslims are. A struggle that has been going on for years. I think it should continue. I think at one time or another it will come into stiff resistance by the nation-state governments, and it is not within the nature of these nation-state governments to give up their authority and make way for those who represent the people. When we do reach that point, we will have to face them, Saddam Hussein and his allies included. Another question here says, I'm trying to hustle through these questions. If you are a Saudi citizen, your voice and judgments about the existence of the U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia will be changed. You don't have kids or sisters, mother or relatives you are worried about. You probably didn't hear what the Iraqi government did with the women and kids of Kuwait and many more. So they are there with other forces to stop this kind of aggression. So you should be aware of your words. Thank you. I take this to be a comment. I appreciate and I sympathize and I understand the feelings of those who have come under the military brutality of Saddam Hussein. It should not be that difficult for them to remember that during the past 8 years it has been the same governments that are purporting today to be protecting the rights of return of the Kuwaitis who had made it possible for Saddam Hussein to do what he is doing today. As far as having women, brothers, sisters, relatives, etc. under such harsh conditions, I don't know if the person knows who asked the question, but let me remind them that my relatives, originally my father and mother, come from Syria and Lebanon. I do have relatives who are under very harsh conditions, similar to those that you are alluding to. I think there is 3 main problems: the Middle East area, Israeli occupation of Palestine, the Iraqi annexation of Kuwait, and the deployment of foreign forces in Saudi Arabia. What is the priority from your point of view for solving these problems? I think if we can cut off the snake's head, we have gone a long way in solving the complexities that are involved here. I don't disagree with the way that the question has been posed. The priority I see is in having the United States step out of this mess. That is the only way that we can begin to sort out the problems and the issues there. If it wasn't for the United States support, I tell you, if it wasn't for the United States support, we wouldn't have these governments in the area. They could not survive for a few months, all of them. Saddam Hussein, Hafez al-Assad, al-Sabah, Fahd, all of them. Just have the United States step out of that and say, we have nothing to do with you governors and rulers, presidents and kings in the area. You simply don't represent those people. You are not giving them the chance to represent their own selves. We just want to step out of this. At that time, the governors themselves will feel vulnerable.